Oh, there we go. Hey guys, Sly here, and welcome back to another episode of the Caspian Game Awards. So tonight we are going to be covering the year 1997, which, of course, this is before the actual Game Awards, but I still want to get into more of the 90s, because, well, the 90s at least deserve some awards, right? Because even though the Game Awards itself didn't start until the 2000s, some of these years deserve some recognition. And, well, truth be told, 1997, surprisingly, pretty damn good year as far as video games. But, of course, we'll get to that in a second. Before I do anything, I'm going to turn on that light, because that's distracting me. Goddamn. Alright, there we go. But, yeah, no, I'm pretty excited to talk about this, and I hope you guys are excited yourselves. Of course, if you guys want to see the rest of the series, of course, check out all the different VODs. Hopefully this will be uploaded onto YouTube probably throughout 2025, because keep in mind, this is all 2024, because, well, yeah. But, yeah, and of course, for those who don't know what this series is, as a bit of a refresher, basically is where I go throughout the entirety of just gaming history, or a big chunk of gaming history, and I pretty much give out the nominees and awards for the best games to represent whatever category I have. So, and, well, we're going beyond the Game Award, like the official Game Award timeline. We're going into the 90s. This is the last year of the late 90s we'll be talking about before we start getting into the mid 90s, which I am iffy on whether or not I still am iffy about whether or not I still want to go to 1994 all the way up to 1990, because I'm not going any further than 1990, just that's for sure. But I mean, keep in mind, we're getting further and further away from the modern time. I mean, we're very far away from modern gaming right now. But regardless, I still want to talk about this year in particular, because, well, 1997, pretty damn good year for video games as far as I'm concerned. Like, it had some games that were kind of but if I'm going to be truthful, 97, easily, at least within the top 15 years that we talked about. I don't know if it's top 10, but it's definitely a year that I think is actually much better than people give it credit for. Because I know some people would say 1998 is a better year. And, well, that was actually a pretty decent year, too. If I'm going to be honest, I feel like 97 and 99 were better. And, well, 97, honestly, you're about to see, pretty solid year. I don't know, the late 90s in general, I feel like were just pretty good years for gaming as a whole, except for RPGs, unfortunately, but, well, we'll get to that in a little bit. But of course, before we get into this, I'm just going to give you guys a bit of a refresher of the rules for those who want to know the qualifications as far as who's allowed to be nominated and what games are going to be, qualifiable. So, because, well, I like consistency. So, of course, as always, what are the qualifications for a nomination? Well, I like to cover the whole year, because I'm someone who does not like snubbing games, because, well, unlike the Game Awards for the past several years, especially, we were going to snub December's games, and, well, most of the games this month. I don't do that. I cover the whole year. So if a game released between January 1st and December 31st of that respective year, it qualifies, because, well, I'm not the Grammys, I'm not the Modern Game Awards, so...
Don't yell at me, yell at the Grammys.
I never understood why they can't just do the whole year, but whatever. So, we cover that, no weird cutoff dates. But also, we're only going to have between 4 to 6 nominees per category, because we don't want to bloat the list, but we don't want to have too few choices. We want to have, like, a good counterbalance. And, well, keep in mind that some of these games people might think released in 98 or even 99, but we're going by initial releases throughout, like, wherever it first released. We're not just counting North American releases. We're counting Japanese and European releases as well. So do keep that in mind. As far as, the Game of the Year nominations, they basically have to be games that are generally liked. But if absolutely necessary, I'll have to choose games that I personally liked as well. That's not going to be a problem here because 97 had some bangers that I think most people, if not everyone, is going to agree what choices I'm going to choose for 97's the Game of the Years themselves. And, well, no remakes or remasters. Not that that's a problem around this era, but I still want to keep that in mind. But also keep in mind that these are only going to be games that I personally am interested in because, well, I'm someone who cares about the aesthetics and general vibes of a game. And if I don't vibe with them, I'm not going to nominate them. Not to say that those games are bad, but this is just my personal opinion. And of course, if you guys disagree, that's completely fine. Because at the end of the day, this is just one man's opinion. But in any event, I think it's about time that we get into talking about the categories, which we've been on a streak. I feel like literally since the 2002 Game Awards that we've been doing, we've been on a streak by having every single category that we've had applicable be able to be nominated, which I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty awesome. Hell yeah. I'm not gonna lie, that's actually pretty good. Unfortunately, though, that might mean this is probably going to be the last year that we're going to be having this amount for the Game Awards itself. So I know that is a bit disappointing. And what I mean by that is I might unfortunately have to start cutting the expansion category because it was kind of hard trying to find even just enough for this. Thankfully, I was still able to, but expansion packs, while they were a thing throughout the 90s, they didn't really start becoming prominent until the mid to late-ish 90s. And so that's going to be a bit harder. And also keep in mind that some of these categories, their gameplay is going to be a bit different compared to how we see these categories now. And so starting around this year, you're going to start seeing a lot less first-person and third-person shooters representing the shooter game category. We're also going to be implementing shoot-'em-ups and rail shooters, as that's what was more common back in the 80s and early to mid-90s. And so keep in mind, shooter doesn't necessarily just mean first-person or third-person, because for a good while, that wasn't even a genre. So, and action adventure is also going to be including a lot of more general adventure games. So, again, really just kind of showcasing just how much different gaming was around this time. But it was still a really good time regardless. And, well, truth be told, I played most of these games myself, which I know is kind of weird, because you don't look like you're old enough. Yeah, but at the end of the day, I can still try to figure out ways to be able to play these games. And, well, a lot of these games hold up to this day. So, and even back then, even if they don't hold up now, they were pretty big for their time. So, but I think that's pretty much all I gotta say right there. So, of course, I have the envelope as always. So let's begin this, starting with our very first category, the best game by a new studio. So, obviously, this is actually going to be a much easier I'd say this is actually going to be a much easier category as we go further and further away. It's probably going to be the easiest category. Granted, it was still kind of difficult to try to figure out what games were qualifiable, because keep in mind, this is not your first game, period. This is the first game that got your studio attention. And you guys will be pretty surprised with what games were certain studios' debuts. Or at least the game that got the studio's attention. And, well, truth be told, this already alone is going to be a big category. So let's jump right in. Yes. So it's funny because I've played 3 of these games on stream before. So, or at least on VOD before. But let's start with the first one, which is Dynasty Warriors. Which this one's a weird one because this is by Omega Studio, who would of course work on the other games in the franchise. But even you might not think that this is actually what this is, because most people associate Dynasty Warriors with the hack and slash action games where you fight hundreds of people on screen. What if I told you that's not what this is? This is actually a fighting game, like a traditional fighting game like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. That's what this is. And I mean, I will admit it is pretty dated, but it's actually, surprisingly, hot take, it's actually still one of the better fighting games from this era. Again, keep in mind, I'm not a big fighting game fan. But one that was made by a new studio and was more sword and, melee-based combat rather than fist-to-fist fighting, was actually, like, for a first studio game, this wasn't actually that bad. Like, you can definitely argue that, of course, the Tekken games are better, but, well, I don't like Tekken, so we're not going to talk about that. So, I don't know. Dynasty Warriors, at least in my opinion, it's not that bad as far as fighting games are concerned. So, it may be, like, the worst Dynasty Warriors, and I say worst because it's not like the other games. But if you want to, like, at least have an appreciation for the original, like, at least, if you want to at least go back and play the original, just keep in mind, it's just a decent fighting game. So, I guess that's all I really gotta say about that. But as far as the other games, yes, these are games that have appeared before on both my YouTube and my Twitch. And, well, let's start with Blood. So, Blood was made by a little-known studio known as Monolith. And if that rings a bell, yes, they would eventually make The Fear and Middle-earth Shadow games. So, yes, this is their debut. This is actually a Doom clone, though, so it's more akin to, Doom, Duke Nukem, stuff like that. And, well, this is a game that I played last year. And I will admit, I did get annoyed with the game, but not because of the game itself, because of the stupid, because the stream messing up on there. So, because even though, like, I did kind of give it a lower score than I hoped, it was not because of the game itself. And in hindsight, I'd probably give this game a better score, because this game is actually pretty good, especially for a debut Doom clone. And keep in mind, this came out after Quake. So the fact that a game that was still that 2.5D style was able to bring its A game like this is impressive, to say the least. And I don't know, that's all I gotta really say is that it's a pretty damn good Doom style of game. That's a bit more on the horror side. Go check it out. And you've got Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey. So this is a cinematic platformer, and my god, this game is actually pretty damn good. I'm sorry. Oddworld is really not a lot like other games that I've played. Like, cinematic platformers, for those who don't know, are basically just kind of platformers that are a bit more slow and a bit more, I guess, I don't want to say realistic in the sense that it's still, like, it's still gamey, but they are a lot more slower and more about slow, deliberate, but precise movement. And, well, this game delivers not just on the gameplay front, but also the atmosphere front. Holy shit, this game is like borderline grim dark, but like in the best ways possible. And as far as being a piece of gaming narrative history, I honestly would say this is a very important step. Because this game honestly has some of the best storytelling for a game from this era. So go check it out if you guys haven't already. It's pretty good. And last but not least, but by the way, by Oddworld Inhabitants. That's what the studio is. And then last but not least, we got Ensemble's Age of Empires. So yes, this is, I mean, Age of Empires, a game that I also played before. Well, I played those 3 games. But this game in particular was pretty notorious for, or not notorious, but it was pretty well known for its style of RTS, where it was a lot more like the progression was historically based. So you actually built up your faction based off the time period that your faction is set. And you go from like the Stone Age all the way up into the Classical Age. And I find that progression to be honestly a really cool way to showcase how much more powerful your units are getting and just your general faction is getting. And I think it lends well, especially for the historical time periods that this is covering. So if you, I mean, it's Age of Empires. If you're an RTS fan, you probably already know what it is, but you get the point. Pretty big game. So we've got ourselves some pretty damn good competition here. And honestly, I wouldn't be hard pressed if any of these would have won. Like, because most people would definitely, like, because there's an argument for, like, at least those last 3 games right here, because of how influential they are. But of course, as always, we can only have one winner. And, well, I guess we can go over that right now. So, here we go. So, let's go over the winner. So, the award for the best game by a new studio for 1997 goes to Blood. Yeah, I decided to choose Blood. You could definitely argue for Age of Empires, and you can definitely argue for Oddworld. But I think the reason why I ended up choosing Blood is, keep in mind that a lot of Doom clones back in the day, and we did an entire tier list on this last year, so go watch that if you guys are interested. But a lot of Doom clones from like the mid to late 90s, they haven't particularly aged that well. Granted, there are some that are definitely better than others, but I think I really do think that Blood is one of those that has really stuck around. And specifically because, not just because of the general level design being pretty good for that era, but also because of its atmosphere. This game is fucking creepy as hell. It is, like, it's, I mean, it's still kind of, it doesn't take itself super seriously, but as far as like an action horror game is concerned, and this is definitely an action horror game, yeah, it's kind of creepy. It's kind of messed up. You fight a bunch of, like, obviously you fight like some typical cultists and zombies and stuff like that, but there's also gargoyles that you go up against. There's like wraith guys that, well, actually one of them scared the shit out of me during one of my playthroughs, which was weird. And even just the weaponry, I think, is actually pretty cool. And even Caleb as a protagonist really does sell this. And hell, not to spoil like the game, obviously either go watch my streams on it or go watch or go play the game yourself. But like the latter half of the game, there is one particular section where it's like, holy shit, they went there. If you guys know, you guys know. If you guys know, you know, because that entire level is, ugh, like it's still a cool game, like no matter what. And I think overall, especially considering that this, Monolith would eventually make great things, I think it's only fair for us to give the win to Blood, because, well, this game, unfortunately, for a while was lost to time, but I think in recent years it has finally started to get a lot more attention, and I think it's definitely deserved. Even if it's not my favorite Doom style of game, that's not Doom or Quake, I still think that it deserves some recognition, so I'm willing to give it the award here. So I guess that then gets us into the best action adventure category. Well, as I already said, we're definitely getting further and further away from how we see action adventure games nowadays. And, well, by this point, this is definitely where we're going to start seeing some games that are a lot more... Either they're going to have mechanics that are a bit more unconventional for nowadays, specifically stuff like tank controls, maybe even some fixed cameras here and there. But also there's going to be what was a very common thing throughout the 90s, the point-and-click adventure games. Which, it's funny because point-and-click games, weirdly enough, has had a bit of a resurgence in recent years. Granted, not because of games that we're going to be talking about in a second, but more so in the sense of, well, a particular survival horror game series that may or may not have been influential to me. But, of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's actually go over what I ended up choosing. So, again, a lot of these are not household names. So I think I gotta explain myself. So the first game we've got here is a game that was originally on the PlayStation 1 known as Intelligent Cube, which is a puzzle game. And you guys know I don't particularly like puzzles all that much, because either they're just a bit too simplistic for my personal taste, or they just get super, super annoying. Though Portal was definitely the game that has started to make me get more, like, be more open-minded to games like that. And, well, since then, I have tried this game out. And I'm not gonna lie, this game is actually pretty damn cool. Like, it's definitely a niche type of game, but it relies on you being able to solve a puzzle without you having to knock your player character off the map. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but the way in which that it was implemented, I think is actually very smart, and honestly something that I think is actually pretty cool. Kind of holds up as a kind of little neat distraction sort of thing. I don't know. Also, this game has some pretty good sound design, and, well, that will be a common theme. There's a lot of games from this year that have pretty damn good sound design, and, well, this game, no exception. So, if you want, like, a 3D puzzle game, Intelligent Cube for the PlayStation 1, pretty decent. That, of course, gets us into our first graphic point-and-click adventure game, Broken Sword 2: The Smoking Mirror. So this is the sequel to the game that was released previously, and it does follow the same characters, where they pretty much go on a sort of conspiratorial quest involving ancient artifacts. In this case, it is a Mayan artifact. And I mean, this game, I think, really does hold up, mostly in its visual and puzzle design. Because I'm not gonna lie, like, this game honestly did impress me whenever I first played it. And I don't know. It's just like, again, it's more of a general like a point and click adventure game. So obviously, your character, you point to the direction, and they typically go there. And if I'm gonna be honest, this is actually probably one of my personal favorite types of that game genre. Especially since it's a lot more about history, which you guys know I used to be a huge history buff. I mean, just look at my childhood eyewitness books that I have back there. That should tell you everything. And just kind of having that tie into like a grander narrative, I think actually does work in this game's favor. So, and also it's another game that doesn't take itself super seriously. So it has a lot more lighthearted moments, and I can appreciate that. And then we got Nightmare Creatures after that, which this is definitely a game. Now, keep in mind, I am talking specifically about the PlayStation 1 version. I am not talking about the PC version. I'm definitely not talking about the N64 version. Don't play those. This is strictly the PlayStation 1 version, because that's the definitive version of this game. And yeah, no, it's pretty good. If you guys remember, I mentioned Medieval from 1998's list, and I mentioned how that was kind of a cool hack and slash. Well, what if I told you the Nightmare Creatures basically was just kind of the more mature version of that, and low-key may or may not have inspired some other popular games in the past, like, 15-ish years. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But, like, I think it's actually pretty cool. I know Wikipedia calls it a survival horror game. It's really not. It's a hack and slash action adventure game. And I think it just has, like, a gothic horror tone to it. And I think that tone works pretty well, especially for the low poly graphics of the PlayStation 1. This game can still scare you with like some of the creepy monster designs, especially since, you know, this is an early 3D game. But like, again, that works in its favor, and the general combat loop really does lend this into being, in my opinion, one of the best PS1 games that not a lot of people talk about. So I recommend you guys seek out either a copy or just wherever they're selling this. I don't know if they're selling this on like Steam, because I said there is a PC version, but it is botched. Maybe you can try seeing if you can find fixes for it through like PC Gaming Wiki, because that's the best website that I know as far as trying to fix a lot of games that might have botched PC ports, but you know how it goes. But, well, that then gets us into the next game, Curse of Monkey Island, another point-and-click adventure game. This is the third game in the Monkey Island series by LucasArts, and, well, what a leap as far as just the visuals, because, well, it's very similar to Broken Sword. It definitely plays out more like an animated cartoon than it does a traditional game. And I think, not only do I find that personally impressive, but I also think that works in this game's favor as far as presentation. It makes it a lot more engaging to be in this pirate world, and just being able to, you know, see LeChuck as a pretty like decent villain. I think he really does start shining in this game. So I think that's actually pretty cool that this game was such a leap. Granted, this was a 6-year sequel in the making, but I think it was definitely for the best. And then we got Tomb Raider 2. So this game, of course, sequel to the original game, and this game is just as successful, if not in some ways more. But I will admit, it is, and granted, this is just a general thing with a lot of the Tomb Raider games on the PlayStation 1, actually pretty much all of them, is that they do kind of play very similar to each other. But this one, of course, has different locations. I'd say the best location in this game is definitely Venice by far. I don't know, just the Venice areas I think are pretty cool here. But don't expect this to be like a sequel that really did change much. It's basically just Tomb Raider, but with a different story. So, again, that's not insulting the game, because it is still a pretty good game. Just keep in mind that you gotta really like that gameplay. So, which, for tank controls, I think it's pretty decent. And last but not least, we've got ourselves a game that I feel like we've definitely talked about this franchise a lot, even though that I've not actually streamed this franchise quite yet. We got the original Grand Theft Auto. So, yes, the original Grand Theft Auto came out. Granted, again, Grand Theft Auto, and of course by extension Grand Theft Auto 2, they are not the same game as the other games in the franchise. This is more of a top-down action car game, as opposed to it being the open world sandboxy experience that we know and love nowadays. It is more of a traditional arcadey style of game. I think that's probably the best way to really call it. But even just despite that, I do think that this game does offer some decent entertainment value. And the different locales that you go to, which, well, funny enough, are the same locales that are very popular in modern day Grand Theft Auto games. Because yes, you do in fact go to Liberty City, Vice City, and San Andreas in this game, which is kind of funny in hindsight, because again, they've kept those same 3 locations for pretty much every game from this point onwards. Just obviously with a different layout and, well, it being more of a more arcadey experience. But at the end of the day, I still think that there's a good nomination because of the general thrill that this game offers. So that's why I'm still going to give it a nod. So I guess that then leads us into the winner, which this will surprise a lot of people because you guys might not think that I would have chosen this, but well, if there's one thing this series should have taught you is await the biggest surprises. I think that's ultimately what you guys should have learned. But in any event, let's go over the winner. So, the award for the best action-adventure game of 1997 goes to Broken Sword 2: The Smoking Mirror. Yeah, I chose a point-and-click game to be the winner. But, well, truth be told, 1997, in my opinion, was when point-and-click games definitely peaked. Unfortunately, they did not have as much success since, but this was definitely the year where I feel like they were perfected, and in my opinion, Broken Sword 2 is amongst one of the best in that style of game. The different types of puzzles that are scattered throughout the game, they offer a decent amount of brain challenge, but they're not super complicated to where you will get stuck. There's always at least some indication on where you need to go and what exactly you need to do. And I like that. It honestly kind of was an inspiration for a lot of other puzzles that were in a lot of other franchises. Specifically, what comes to mind would be stuff like, well, funny enough, Resident Evil. Okay, maybe not Resident Evil, but definitely stuff like Silent Hill and Uncharted in a weird way. And I think that lends itself for a lot more of an engaging gameplay loop that doesn't rely on a lot of gunfights or just straight up action, because this is just a pure adventure game. It doesn't need to have a lot of action for it to be engaging, and this game is definitely good proof of that. And, well, as I've already alluded to, this game has some really damn good visuals. This game, honestly, at points, straight up looks like a late 1990s cartoon. Like, it really does showcase just how far gaming technology really got in this decade. And, well, there was a time where this was considered to be the best game as far as visuals were concerned. There was no other game that really, or at least that was like a 2D game. Obviously, 3D games were still evolving around the time. This is still a 2D game. But the fact that games like this were still showing just how damn strong they can be is a real good testament to the type of game that this is. And it's helped by the fact that this game has a pretty decent narrative to boot. Obviously, a bit more on, a bit more, of like a archaeological adventure story. But it's really carried by the voice acting in this game, which honestly is better than you would expect. It's actually pretty, like, the voice acting in this game is pretty good compared to a lot of other games from around this time, because voice acting was still somewhat new, at least somewhat. So the fact that a game was able to provide such a decent narrative, especially for this time period, I think that speaks volumes to how much they were able to do. So, for me personally, I think that it is definitely a game that it's worth seeking out. And thankfully, it's readily available on Steam. So, go check it out. Alright. Platformers. So, we're going to start really ramping up the platformer category. Because, my god, there were a lot that were released this year. And a surprisingly amount of them had a decent amount of score. And I will even say this. Some of the games that I will be nominating on here, people will probably laugh at. But, again, I personally genuinely think that these are good enough games to be nominated. Even if some of these are definitely games that you can definitely tell are of their time. For when they came out, they were actually pretty good. And as far as I am concerned, they are definitely good representatives for platformers as a whole. So, once you see the lists, I will explain myself. So, okay. So, it should not surprise you that Oddworld is going to be nominated here. Again, that game has a lot that has to offer there. But, surprisingly enough, there are some other more obscure games that I do want to give a bit of a shout out to. And the first one of these is known as The Lost Vikings 2, which you might laugh. It might look like, oh, this is just another sort of, mid to late-ish 90s sort of platformer game. You would definitely be half correct on that, but here's the weird part about this game. This was one of the last Super Nintendo games that was made. 97. But it was also released for the PlayStation 1. And this game was a bit more puzzle-based than your, actually pretty much any other games that are around here, if I'm going to be honest. It was a lot more engaged with problem solving, which is weird because it's like Vikings. That doesn't have anything to do with that. Well, true, but then you remembered that, well, the PS1 version was made by Beam Software, who made Shadowrun, which is actually a pretty damn good RPG for the Super Nintendo. And then the Super Nintendo was made by, I don't know, a little known company from the 90s that, you may not have heard of. They're called Blizzard. Yes, this is a Blizzard game. And, well, as far as one of their more obscure projects, I think it's actually pretty fine. So, if you want something that's a bit more on the goofy side, that is a more fantasy-tinged platformer with some light puzzle elements, Lost Vikings is actually a pretty good choice. So, and, well, both the PS1 and Super Nintendo versions, they're actually both viable, which is a rarity, especially for a late Super Nintendo game. You would not think it would be as good, but there's some people who even swear that that's actually the better version. But, it is what it is. Which, well, speaking of Super Nintendo, well, not in this game in particular, but the legacy of this game, Mega Man X4. So this was the first of the PlayStation 1 Mega Man X games. And, well, it's more of that. If you liked Mega Man X and you liked its sequels, you're definitely going to like this one. Just, it's a bit longer, and it has more dialogue, as, well, this is the first of the games that was on disc, so it allowed for a lot of that. And it's decent. So, again, if you like that style of Mega Man, you're more than likely going to like this. And, well, that then gets us into the other obscure game that's on here, which I know someone is probably laughing me at, but no joke, I am dead serious when I say this is actually a decent platformer. Croc Legend of the Gobos is a mascot platformer that, similar to a lot of other ones, was kind of forgotten to time. And while I would have agreed with a lot of people with a lot of those other ones, because, well, I'm just going to be frank, a lot of games, especially on the Super Nintendo, there were a lot of, mascot platformers that just kind of came and went, and nobody really remembers them, for very good reason. Croc was one of those that was more for the PlayStation 1, and so it is a 3D platformer, but similar to Lost Vikings, it was a lot more engaged with more problem solving rather than direct platforming challenges. And I think that at least makes it stand out, especially for a 3D platformer on the PlayStation 1. And so, because of its gameplay diversification, I think it is a worthy enough game. The sequel may not be, but I will stand by the original game. So, and, well, has a pretty, cutesy little art style. So, gotta give it due diligence. Of course, that leads us into Crash Bandicoot 2 with Cortex Strikes Back. Which, this game is a direct improvement in every single way compared to the first Crash. Well, except for the preciseness that's required. You still are required to play this game very precisely. But as far as more gameplay loop variety, I think this game is definitely a much more it's definitely a worthy sequel. And, well, it kind of expanded upon a lot of the elements that were in the original Crash by fleshing out their characters a bit more. I mean, Cortex actually has a bit more of a presence in this game, hence the name, and I think that works in this game's favor. It actually makes him to where he's a lot more of a direct threat rather than him just kind of being faded into the background in the first game. And I think that's definitely something that is worth of note. So, yeah, Crash 2, definitely worthy to be nominated here. And, well, for this last game, let's go Chibi. Let's go Klonoa. Door to Phantom Mile. which it's funny because, well, similar to Croc, Klonoa was another one of those mascot platformer games that was kind of forgotten to time, but until recently, with a certain re-release, Klonoa finally got a bit more attention, and I think it's well deserved because this game, I'm not gonna lie, I mean, Klonoa has always been kind of a very adorable looking game. Like it's very chibi Japanese, but that's why I think it's pretty cool. And besides, I mean, you're talking to someone who has surrounded themselves with like dark, edgy, more mature stuff. I don't know, I'm just like, give me more of this, please. I need more happiness in my life. So, but yeah, and also for it being a 2.5D platformer where it uses 3D backdrops with 2D sprites, I think it's actually pretty cool. So yeah, in my opinion, Klonoa easily deserves a recognition for the best platformer category, and also it's honestly a really for anyone who has kids, this is actually a really good beginner game for kids. That's all I'm gonna say about that. So let's go over the winner. So we got some really good choices here, but ultimately, I think I chose the correct one here. So the award for the best platformer of 1997 goes to Oddworld Abe's Odyssey. Again, the other games are pretty close, but I think ultimately this is probably the correct choice, and I think most people are going to agree. So, of course, going back to the my inner darkness for a little bit, as the the edgy emo kid, hence the title of my channel. This game honestly does have a beautiful atmosphere to it. It is some of the best world building and some of the best visual designs for a game from the late 90s. It is honestly very impressive with the scope that they were able to encapsulate with a game like this. And, well, top that with the fact that this game basically is one big middle finger criticism to capitalism, especially with the fact that you're working, like, you play as Abe and you work at like a meat processing plant, which, well, they're starting to run out of their source of meat, therefore they start using your own species, just kind of using it as an allegory of how expendable workers were. And again, this is a game from 1997. A lot of these themes are very relevant nowadays. And I just find that to be really fantastic, just world and storytelling here. Like, world building and storytelling. And, well, it's also helped by the fact that this game is pretty challenging, because there are multiple endings in the game, and the game encourages you to save your fellow workers in order for you to get the good ending. Granted, it can get a bit too bullshit at certain parts, but ultimately this game really does offer a lot of value, especially if you want to go for the multiple endings, which of course adds replay value here. And in my opinion, one of the best parts about this game is the possession mechanic, where you are able to possess certain creatures and enemies for a short amount of time for you to be able to solve a lot of the puzzles in this game. And I think that's a pretty cool mechanic. And so and also just being able to interact with the environment a lot and be able to control a lot of things. I think it's pretty cool. And well, it's always funny with being able to hear Abe's voice where he's like, "Hello, hello, follow me." Okay. Like, it's, again, sound design really damn good. This year was so damn good for sound design. Holy shit. So, yeah. Oddworld Abe's Odyssey, easily, at least in my opinion, the best choice for best platformer game. Which, of course, then gets us into the RPG category, which I've said this for the 98 and 99 Caspian Game Awards. Just the late 90s in general, and well, this includes 1997, unfortunately. I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of a weaker time period for RPGs. Every other category, it was a fantastic time period. Shooter games, platformers, action-adventure games, simulation games, sports and racing and fighting games. But I'm not gonna lie, role-playing games around this time period just wasn't particularly that interesting, at least in comparison to other time periods for role-playing games. And that's not to say that every single RPG from this time period was bad. Of course, we still have a category for a reason. And trust me when I say this, the games I did nominate here, people are going to be ecstatic for me to talk about. But it was, at least in hindsight, a weird transitionary phase. Because a lot of RPGs were starting to go from 2D to 3D. And it's going to show here. But even besides that, this was a pretty just generally good year as far as some of the games here. So let's go over what I ended up choosing. Oh, shoot. There we go. So, yeah, we got some really damn good choices. So, because of that, though, I will admit, out of the 3 years from the late 90s, 97, 98, 99, 97, it was definitely the best year, in my opinion, specifically because of, well, the first 3 games that you see right there alone. So, let's talk about that. Diablo. I mean, it's Diablo, the dungeon crawler RPG series that is legendary nowadays. And this game, no exception. I will admit, it is, like, at least this game, it really doesn't play a lot. It doesn't really play that different from a lot of other mid-90s top-down isometric RPGs at the time. But what made this at least stand out a bit more was not just the more hellish look that this game had, but also the fact that this game was exclusively a dungeon crawler. That's what made this a big deal at the time. Because a lot of RPGs, at least that were isometric, they were open world, and they had dungeons, but they weren't games that were specifically about the dungeons. But this game is. And, well, hence the term dungeon crawler kind of sparked around this time. And, at least in my opinion, this game does hold up in a lot of ways. I will admit this, though, Diablo 2 is my preferred Diablo game, but Diablo 1 is still a game that is worthy of its recognition. And, well, considering that Blizzard also made this game, and it's kind of funny thinking that they made a, kid-friendly platformer game just a few months after this, it's pretty ironic. But still pretty damn good. And then we've got Final Fantasy VII, which I think this game needs no introduction. It is one of the most highly regarded games of all time. It is, in a lot of people's minds, the best Final Fantasy game. Some people even dare say it is the best RPG ever made. And it is a titan as far as games. Hell, a lot of people do consider this, like, this was the game that coined the term AAA game. So, because of its high budget values and its grand scope. I will admit it's technically not the first AAA game though, but it's definitely the first game that coined the term, and for good reason. Because this game is pretty damn good. So, I don't even think I need to tell you guys to go check it out. It's Final Fantasy VII. And besides, there's the remake games that are out, so you have no excuse not to experience the story. So, and also the original version is still on PC on Steam, so that's cool. And then, well, we got ourselves Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which, I'm not gonna lie, I actually really do love this game. Which is weird, because I've not streamed this game. But this, in my opinion, is the type of Castlevania that I do purely love. Because this was a game changer. Now, you guys are probably wondering, well, isn't this technically a platformer, though? Because why is this not nominated there? True, but this game added a lot. Like, this game, what this game added was the leveling system, which, well, truth be told, pretty much stuck with Castlevania from this point onwards. You leveled up, and you got better gear as a result for that, and you fight a lot of enemies in each area depending on your level. So, hence, this is technically an RPG, and the beginning of the era of Castlevania's RPG era. And I'm not gonna lie, this game is another cult classic, or not even cult classic. It's still regarded as being one of the best games of all time, and I have to wholeheartedly agree. This game is fantastic in almost every single way, except for the death loading screens. That, I will admit, is kind of annoying, but even besides that, go check it out. Easily a game that I would recommend. So, yeah, those three games alone really do make this the best year for the late 90s as far as RPGs. Because I will admit, 98 and 99, a lot of the games were just kind of average to above average. I just ended up choosing a lot of the ones that I personally liked, or at least had some peak of interest in. Because if I'm going to be honest, these other two choices kind of do follow under that thumb. So, Saga Frontier. So this is a continuation of the romancing Saga games that were originally on the Super Nintendo. As a matter of fact, I think that this was the first game that was released in the Americas, if I'm not mistaken. So, let me double check that right now, though. Yes, this was the first one. This was the first internationally released in the Saga franchise. And it's fine. I'm not gonna pretend Saga is, this amazing RPG franchise. Fun enough, it did spin off from Final Fantasy, because yes, this is a Square game as well. And it was originally a part of the Final Fantasy umbrella, but it eventually kind of split off into its own thing. And again, it's okay. So if you like that style of JRPG, you're going to be happy here. So, yeah, that's all I really say. But the last game we got here is, well, we're finally going to talk about the Ultima series, because we're going to be talking about Ultima Online, which, another early MMO. This time around, well, this is the first MMO we're talking about that is Oh, no, yeah, RuneScape's 3D. Yeah, this is the first 2D MMO here. Because, well, this is a mid to late 90s isometric RPG, similar to Diablo. But this one is that more traditional style that I mentioned before. And want to know the crazy part about this game is? The servers are still up. 27 years later, this game is still online, which is insane. Like, how? Like every other MMO, at least definitionally MMO game, before this, dead. You cannot play those servers anymore. But somehow, this little Ultima Online game here, part of the grander Ultima series, this thing stuck around almost 30 years later, which is just wow. Granted, I can't tell you how much longer the servers are going to be on, because, well, this game, obviously, for a game this old, is gonna have a massive player drop, but just the fact that this was able to stay as long as it has been, I feel like in good faith alone, I just had to nominate this. And even just for being, again, another early MMO, especially that one that is a 2D MMO, like an isometric 2D RPG that is online. I'm going to be honest, that's actually kind of cool. So, yeah. In my opinion, at least worthy of a nomination, especially since, well, this game, I think it did directly inspire stuff like RuneScape, so that's worth something. But, well, definitely a diverse choice as far as RPGs here. But there can only be one winner, so let's do it. So, the award for the best role-playing game of 1997 goes to Final Fantasy VII. I would have gotten shot if I did not give the win to Final Fantasy VII. How could I not? As much as I love Symphony of the Night, and I do respect Diablo, Final Fantasy VII is the game that I think ultimately is the correct choice here. Because, well, this is one of the most influential games of all time, and it is considered to be one of the best games of all time, period. I mean, obviously, this game has an iconic cast of characters. I mean, obviously, everyone knows. Sorry, I'm just trying to remind myself. Yeah, everyone knows Cloud and Sephiroth, but, well, there's also a bunch of other characters like Tifa, Aerith, and Barrett, who follow you throughout the entirety of the game. And even a lot of some of the other obscure characters that are in here that add a lot of depth, like Rufus or Sid, which I know there's Sid in a lot of other Final Fantasy games, but the Sid in particular. President Shinra. Like, this game has a lot of just depth with its characters, and that's ultimately what was one of the things that made this game popular. Granted, keep in mind, this was still the time where they didn't have voice acting for Final Fantasy quite yet. That wouldn't be for a few other entries later down the line, but just the written dialogue that is here, it has a lot of just personal meaning for a lot of people, and it was able to have such an impact, especially since, well, this game has a pretty big and pretty deep narrative, of course, talking about dystopias, and just kind of the oppression of people under an empire and just kind of rising against that. I think that lends itself to having a lot of credence to it. And it's helped by the fact that the gameplay itself, while the combat is still very similar to that of older Final Fantasy games, just with a 3D flair to them, what really changed is the overworld gameplay, where you are not necessarily in like, you're not playing like a character that represents the entire crew walking around giant versions of the map that you're going around. This time around, you're actually playing in scale throughout the entire game as Cloud throughout the different streets of, well, the world that you're in. And it makes it to where it's a lot more, I don't want to say realistic, but it's definitely a lot more to scale to where you're going around. And I think that makes it a lot more engaging rather than just seeing your character just walk around, hundreds of miles as a giant character like in the older games. So, not that that's like a major complaint, but it's just something that is something to keep in mind. And, well, this game, at least to my knowledge, was one of the first games to implement a lot of side activities throughout the world, which, of course, is a pretty big deal for a lot of, like, especially for a lot of RPGs, because a lot of RPGs didn't really consider a lot of, like, side activities, and I mean, like, activities, quests, of course, but, like little mini games. This was one of the first games to really have a lot of those. And I think that makes the game a lot more engaging. So, overall, Final Fantasy VII, it may have not been the first AAA game, at least in my opinion, but it's definitely the first game that recognized that was the direction that gaming was going. And, well, I know AAA is definitely a dirty word nowadays, especially online, but keep in mind, this was an important step into making gaming become a major phenomenon in the current day. And I gotta thank Final Fantasy VII, at least partially, for that. So, yeah. Well, this then gets us into the shooter category, which, well, as I already alluded to, I'm actually going to change that a little bit. Person, rail, and there we go. Now we're going retro. So we are no longer just exclusively talking about first and third person shooters. We are also going to be talking about rail shooters as well as shoot 'em up games from this point onwards, because, well, we're getting closer to the era where shooter games were that style. And truth be told, that's at least going to be one of the games that is on here. So let's talk about them. So I'm going to nominate Blood for this as well, because I do think that it is a solid horror Doom clone. But this is where we start getting into the rail shooter part. Star Fox 64. So, again, you guys know me, I'm not the biggest fan of the N64, but the games that are good that are on there, I am willing to give credit where credit is due. And, well, Star Fox 64, pretty damn good game in a lot of ways. It basically was a massive improvement compared to the first Star Fox. And I think that as far as flight rail shooters are concerned, yeah, no, this set the standard pretty damn well for those types of games. Like, rail shooters, I don't know, rail shooters tend to kind of have that problem of kind of having a lot of samey gameplay. especially if they're like arcade rail shooters. But Star Fox 64, because it is a vehicular based rail shooter, it allows for a lot more leniency. And I think that actually works with this game quite a bit. So, yeah, Star Fox 64, I think deserves the nod here. But, well, that then leads us into a game franchise that I will admit I kind of forgot to talk about the other games up until this point. Although, if I'm going to be honest, that's partially because of the huge spike increase. Yeah, fuck you, eBay. But I'm going to finally at least give credence back to Armored Core after so many episodes. We're going to talk about the original Armored Core, which this is a third-person shooter in this case, a mech-based third-person shooter. And yeah, no, this game is for a PlayStation 1 third-person shooter. I actually control a lot better than I thought it was going to be. It's not like, modern, but it's still a game that I think is pretty decent for this style of gameplay, especially since third-person shooters were also somewhat new at the time. And so because of that, yeah, no, Armored Core, I'd say, if you like mecha shooters, you're probably gonna like this game. Just don't fall for the scalpers online, because holy shit, Armored Core, too fucking expensive online nowadays. That actually makes me sad that I'm probably never going to be able to play another one of these games, well, except for my little box over there. But it is what it is. As I box, I mean this thing, but of course, how that goes. So yeah. Also, we got Hexen 2 here. It's basically just Wizard Quake. I mean, Hexen and Heretic, they've always been games that just kind of followed on the coattails of id Software. That's not an insult, by the way, because, well, Raven Software, they made this game, and they've always had direct ties with id. So, I mean, how they even helped publish some of those games. So, because, yeah, Heretic, more of a Doom, like directly just a Doom clone, held it's in the same exact engine. Same thing with Hexen, the first game. But Hexen 2 was on the Quake 1 engine, and well, it plays basically just like Quake, but a bit more puzzle based. There's a lot more just kind of cryptic stuff about it, which can make it a bit annoying. But I think what makes up for it is the fantasy locales that are in here, because I'm not gonna lie, I'm a sucker for fantasy stuff. And also the fact that this was a first-person shooter that had a class-based system is worth note, as that just wasn't quite a thing yet. Except for the Hexen series, at least as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's interesting. I don't know, Hexen, I just find to be an interesting, like Hexen Heretic, I think is just kind of an interesting series in general. So, go check it out if you like fantasy shooters. And then we've got ourselves Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, which I was hesitant on putting this as part of the shooter game category. But because this game is a hybrid game, it is a first-person, third-person shooter hybrid. Not just that, though, it is also a hack and slash game, because, well, you see it on the cover. You get to play as a Jedi Knight with a lightsaber. Kyle Katarn gets a lightsaber in this game. But the game itself is built upon an engine that is a first-person, like, it's a shooter engine. So I think it makes sense to have it at least nominated for shooter game. Which, well, in that case, it is another Quake clone. It's Star Wars Quake. And again, that's not an insult because I actually really do like this game. I think that it is arguably it's as good as the first Dark Forces. So, and I mean, I am kind of biased with this anyways because I'm someone who prefers the old Star Wars Legends continuity as opposed to the more recent canon within Star Wars. Not to say that everything from Star Wars canon nowadays has sucked, because I am someone who did like Andor, and I really liked Jedi Fallen Order. But as far as the Legend continuity, I just find this one more interesting. So this one does diverge from the modern Star Wars timeline. But the story that they're telling here about you going up against a bunch of dark Jedi, I think is pretty cool. The real life, real time cutscenes are kind of funny though. You can definitely tell late 90s. But I'll at least give them some respect for at least trying. So, and well, some of the cutscenes are actually, for the budget for this game, are actually pretty impressive. So, I'm not gonna give them too much shit. So, if you just want to shoot down a bunch of bounty hunters and chop off the arms of stormtroopers, well, this is a game for you. So, and then last but not least, we got ourselves, well, the sequel to the game that I've been comparing a lot of these games to, Quake 2, which is a game that we've streamed as well back a few years ago. And by the way, I am well aware that this game did have an update last year, adding an expansion. I may or may not play it real soon. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But overall, I do think that Quake 2 was pretty fun. I will admit, I don't prefer it. Like, I still prefer the original Quake. It's not as good in my opinion, but it is still a pretty good follow-up to one of the best shooter games of all time, in my opinion. And, well, in a lot of ways, surprisingly enough, a game that I don't want to say was ahead of its time because, well, it's still a 90s shooter at the end of the day. But this game had some things in it that I think warrant a lot of credit. Specifically, the fact that this game had a lot more mission objective level design and the interconnected levels themselves. Granted, it does kind of make the game a bit longer than you would think it is, but I think it works in its favor for the most part. So, Quake 2, I'd recommend to a lot of people. It may not be the same as the original Quake, just reusing a lot of similar assets, help even sound files. It's still a game worth recommending, so I'd still check it out. So let's then go over the winner. So, the award for the best shooter game of 1997 goes to, this may surprise you guys, Star Fox 64. Yes. I chose an N64 game, a rail shooter, to win. You guys thought I was going to do Quake 2, which that wouldn't have been a bad choice. And truth be told, Dark Forces 2 also would have been a good choice as well. But I'm going to choose Star Fox 64 specifically for a few reasons. I mean, first of all, this game basically is a massive overhaul compared to the first Star Fox, which I mean is pretty obvious considering that that was originally on the Super Nintendo. This was on the N64. Pretty obvious. But it's mostly in the sense that, well, if I'm going to be honest, I mean, you guys know I hate the N64 controller. I think it sucks. I think that it is the biggest hindrance as to why I can't enjoy a lot of the games on there as much. And as a result, I don't like playing a lot of N64 games. But, well, this is actually one of the few games that I think works in the controller's benefit because it is on rails and you're not like actually moving the character. You go the character like flies the ship and uses all the vehicles on their own. All you just have to do is just point and shoot. And I think in a situation like that is much more tolerable. So yeah. Also, well, this game has pretty cool characters. I mean, obviously the characters were in the original Star Fox, so of course you have Fox, you have Falco, and like they're generally speaking like yeah, they were in the original game, but they were given a lot more life here as well. They had a lot of dialogue. It's cheesy stuff, but it's pretty memorable, and their dialogue is pretty iconic for a reason. And there's a lot of different section types within this game, which freshens up the pace of this game as opposed to just being one type, which I think is definitely for the better. And also helped by the fact that this game has the different branching paths, which the first game did as well, but this game, because of the different variety of mission types and the locations that you go to, those were added in here. I think the branching paths with the level variety mix themselves pretty well with each other. And, well, as I already said, this game has some excellent sound design. So, ultimately, I do think that this is actually, in my opinion, the best game to represent the shooter category. Even if it's not the shooter games that we're used to nowadays, I think that it is pretty peak as far as real shooters are concerned. So, yeah. Alright. Sim strategy. So, again, sim strategy, another category that was pretty big in the 90s. And 97, no exception. Because, oh my god, 97, there were so many good ones to choose from. Hell, it was hard for me to end up choosing the winner here. So, this should tell you just how good of a year 97 was for this particular category. Which, of course, yeah, you see the dilemma here. You see why I was a bit there. But let's start with Star Wars X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, which I know it's funny, another Star Wars game. But, well, this one is a space combat flight simulator. And I think it's actually pretty fun. It's the sequel to both X-Wing and TIE Fighter. And funny enough, this was originally a multiplayer-only game, making this one of the first strictly PvP-based games. Which, I mean, that may not have been the best idea in hindsight. I mean, thankfully they added in the expansion, which added a single-player campaign so that you weren't just with paperweight if either the server shut down or when people started to finally go away. But, like, even just besides that, I think this game still looks pretty damn good, and I think it does play very well. Especially for a game that, of course, is equal to some of the best Star Wars games of their time. And just being able to have a multiplayer, like a dedicated multiplayer game to this, honestly, this was definitely ahead of its time. I'd argue this was ahead of its time. Because, well, keep in mind, this was before Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament really kickstarted multiplayer being a popular thing. Like, PvP multiplayer. So, if there's any game to really call ahead of its time, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter is one of them. I don't usually like saying that, but yeah, I don't usually like using ahead of its time as like a compliment because I think it's an overused term, but this is definitely a case where I can actually use it. which of course gets us into Dungeon Keeper, which, I mean, it's funny because I was just playing this right before I started recording. I love Dungeon Keeper. It's so good. Like, the fact that EA ignores this franchise and they made a shitty mobile version instead. It's like, god damn it. This is such a cool concept. Because it's basically a reverse dungeon crawler, for those who don't know. Basically, instead of going into the dungeon and fighting the enemies, you are running the dungeon and creating your own spawn to protect your vaults from outside influences. And I think that's a really cool twist, and it makes for some of the best management simulation from this time period. It is so damn fun. Like, honestly, yes, this is before my time, but I don't care. I still think that this game is one of the best simulation games, just period. And it's just such a damn shame that, there has never been a third game in this series. So, and again, this, along with its sequel, they're both equally as valid. This one being more 2D based as opposed to the sequel, which is 3D based. Dungeon Keeper is a game, just go play it. Go play it now. I don't even care. Just stop watching the stream right now and go play it. I don't even care. God, I'm sorry. I really do love this game. It's so good. It's so good. Especially if you're using the fan-made X, Keeper X patch. Oh my god. So, it's so good. Which, well, speaking of so good, XCOM Apocalypse, which, obviously you guys know, I also love the XCOM games. And, well, we're going to be talking about the old school XCOM games from the 90s here. This is the third in the series. And instead of it taking place across the world, it's set specifically in one city where you go into different sectors. And I think that's a decent change of pace, especially since this game actually has the option for you to play in both real-time or turn-based as far as a tactics game is concerned. And I think swapping between the two modes, it actually works out pretty decently. And I don't know, I just find this game to be a lot fun. Again, go play XCOM if you guys haven't already. Doesn't matter if it's the old games or the new ones. They're equally as valid as for each other, and this game is worth it. Do it. For me, please. So, I know, I'm sorry. Simulation games were so good back in the 90s. I wish sim and strategy games were just more popular, but, well, people my age just don't appreciate strategy games anymore, which is kind of sad. But, well, speaking of strategy, Total Annihilation. I'm not gonna lie, this was so close to being snubbed, but ultimately I decided to have this on here because, well, this is the direct precursor to a few other games that we've talked about in some of our other episodes. And what makes this game stand out is the fact that this is an RTS that's set on a huge map. Really big. And you control these giant walkers that are around, which, well, yes, if that sounds familiar, that is exactly what the Supreme Commander games were doing, as those were spiritual successors to this game. And, made by a lot of the same people. And yeah, no, Total Annihilation, I think just on its scale alone, that's why I'm going to nominate it here. It may not be the best choice, but just the fact that it has that big of enough of a scale, especially for an RTS game from 1997, I think it's warranted. So, in my opinion, this game is pretty cool in that regard. Of course, I'm also nominating Age of Empires here, which I forgot to say. But the other game I'm going to nominate here for Sim Strategy is going to be the last major Wing Commander game. Wing Commander Prophecy. This was like, I mean, there was the game that was released 10 years later, but that was more of an online game. This one is the last, I guess, true Wing Commander game of the old flight sim franchise that was pretty big in the 90s. This was the last hurrah, and I will admit it is not the best Wing Commander game, but it ended on a decent note. Like, I'm not gonna pretend that, this was as good as, Wing Commander 3 or 4, but I definitely am gonna vouch for it for being the last one of its kind, and for ending the franchise on a high note. At least as far as this game is concerned. So, because this was like 97. Again, Wing Commander Arena, it's okay, but like it's not really like a true Wing Commander sequel, if that makes sense. This was kind of the last one. This was kind of the last one to kind of do that style, and I think it's a decent end. And well, there's Mark Hamill in it, so that's worth something. So this one's really close. This was a very, very close one for me as far as choosing what game. But I gotta go with my gut. I gotta go with what I think is probably the correct choice. Even if in my heart it may not be the correct one, I think objectively speaking it's probably the best one here. So here we go. The award for the best sim strategy game of 1997 begrudgingly goes to Age of Empires. This is the correct choice. It's not the correct choice. Dungeon Keeper should be here, but it's the correct choice. I mean, this game is iconic. It is regarded as being one of the best RTS games of all time. But why is that? Well, because of its historical-based progression system, as I alluded to it like earlier. This game directly ties its gameplay towards what era your faction is standing in at that current time. Which, you start at the Stone Age, go all the way up to the Classical era, and that is honestly pretty cool as far as how, like, being able to visually show how powerful your faction is on the battlefield. I think that's a pretty cool way in which the game shows that. And, well, it's helped by the fact that there's so many tech trees. Like, it's a pretty big, tech tree as far as being able to build all your upgrades. And I think that lends itself pretty well with how deep you can really get all of your units in here. And, well, there's also a ton of factions that are in the game itself. Some of which, I will admit, aren't really that different from each other as a whole. But there's enough variety for you to be able to mess around with. I mean, generally there's Greek, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and East Asian styles of factions. But there's 12 factions in total, which... That's insane. Especially for an RTS game from 1997. And that's not even including the expansions and all the extra content. So the fact that this game had that many factions to, begin with, that's insane. So, good job, Ensemble. Actually, you added a ton of variety. And, well, again, I usually don't like saying this, but considering that most RTS games only had like 2 factions, yep, that was ahead of its time. So, I mean, this game also has its campaigns. Like, it has its campaign levels, which they offer a decent challenge. And, well, I'm not gonna lie, sprite work in this game, honestly, some of the best of its time. So, yeah. Alright, sports, racing, and fighting games. Again, another category that I will admit is not the category that is my cup of tea, but I am still going to nominate just in good faith because, well, 97 was a decent year for this category. And I'd say that it was also kind of an important year. So let's go over what we got here. So, Dynasty Warriors getting nominated here. Shouldn't surprise you guys. But another fighting game I'm actually going to nominate is a little lesser known, but it's the style that I like. Bushido Blade. I'm not the biggest fan of fighting games, but you guys probably have already noticed that I prefer my fighting games to have it to where, well, the fighters aren't just using their fists. It's kind of the main reason why I never really gravitate towards Mortal Kombat or Tekken or Street Fighter as much, which I know we got Mortal Kombat, which we'll get to in a second, but I like having it feel more like a duel rather than just fist fighting. And Bushido Blade was one of those fighter games or fighting games that was like that. And I think that's pretty decent. So and I mean, it's a bit more on the obscure side, but as far as fighting games from around this time, in my opinion, it's actually one of the better ones. So, go check it out if you guys haven't already. Need for Speed, of course, is here as well. The second game in the series. Goddamn, I am so sick and tired of seeing that logo on every one of these goddamn things. Yes, we have nominated Need for Speed so many times. Oh my god. I mean, it's not even that I dislike the series, because I actually think the series is fine. It's just there's so many Need for Speed games. Oh my god. But thankfully it's a case where the quantity somehow doesn't ruin the quality. So I'm willing to give it a pass. And, well, thankfully Need for Speed 2 is an upgrade compared to the first game. Even its special edition. More tracks, more cars, some light customization, though not too much. It's a decent little package. So that's all I gotta really say about Need for Speed 2. And then we got Mortal Kombat 4, which, yes, I know I said I'm not the biggest fan of fighting games, but I am someone who does recognize that Mortal Kombat is a fighting game franchise that is very important and near and dear with a lot of people. And Mortal Kombat 4, it was kind of the last one of the original era where they were, I guess, good. Because Mortal Kombat, unfortunately, after this would kind of be in a bit of a slump. But as far as the first Mortal Kombat game that was readily available on both the arcade and at consoles at home, at the same time at least, yeah, no, this game at least deserves some recognition, and I'm willing to give it at least a bit of respect. So, this is kind of interesting to see Goro right there with the in that pose. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. It's just more. This is more Mortal Kombat. If you like the trilogy, like the first 3 games, you're gonna like 4. Then we got the least mature game on this entire list, like the least edgy one here. Diddy Kong Racing. Oh my god. Okay. I think I just give this one a lot of credit because this was one of the first non-Mario Kart kart racers. And it did it pretty decently. And, well, I also like the fact that this game does make it to where you can actually use multiple vehicles that weren't just carts. I mean, you see it on the cover there. You can use planes, you can use airboats. It uses a lot of variety of different vehicles, and I think that lends itself for a lot more wackier situations than you might think. And I think that's actually pretty cool. So if you want a kart racer that isn't also a kart racer, but also is not Mario, it's decent fun. So, and then last but not least, we got ourselves the original Gran Turismo, which, this game, for a console racing game, this is actually a very impressive one. It does have like a small track of, like a small list of tracks, but it has a very good selection of cars and a ton of colors for a lot of said cars as well. A lot of like licensed cars that were very popular at the time too, which Need for Speed had a few of those, but the fact that this was a console release that had that much, that was actually pretty impressive. And also, I'm not gonna lie, the game, even for a game on console in 1997, this game actually surprisingly looks pretty decent. It doesn't look half bad. There is some pop in, but that's not taking away from just how smooth this game looks. It actually even surprised me. So, I guess it just goes to show... Excuse me. I guess it just goes to show that even in this era, racing games did look, in fact, really damn good. It's always been a thing. So let's go over the winner. Alright. And thankfully, we are actually pretty much almost done with the categories. We just got expansions and then, yeah. So, here we go. The award for the best sports/racing/fighting game of 1997 goes to Gran Turismo. Yeah, I will admit, it's mostly the mechanics and the visuals that really do put this on the edge, but I'm telling you when I say this game is impressive for a console racing game. I mean, the game had, one of the things that made this game stick out was its control scheme. It was a bit more realistic feeling compared to a lot of other racing games at the time, even compared to Need for Speed around this era. I mean, yeah, you still had this controller, which was, more just kind of typical racing control, like, it's not a wheel, but the fact that it was a bit more player involved compared to just kind of pressing forward on the D-pad or something like that. The fact that you had to actually use buttons to specifically move forward, like press a button down a button, kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe. I'm sorry, but like basically the way in which this controlled makes it feel more as if you are trying to like actually drive a vehicle. I know that sounds weird, especially for using a controller like this, but in context it makes sense, and for the time it was impressive. So there's that. And well, as I've already said, this game looks really damn good for a PlayStation 1 game. I don't know how they do it, but this borderline sometimes even looks like a PC game. I am not joking. The only thing that gives it away is the pop-in. So the fact that this game has some pretty damn good looking tracks is insane. Granted, there's only like what, I think 8 tracks in total in the game, maybe even less than that. That is a bit disappointing, although I'm not going to give them too much shit since, again, this is a console thing. And, well, that's made up for the fact that there's so many cars in this game. And they have so many, like, color choices. It's actually insane. So, or at least so many cars for its time. Obviously, more games would implement way more cars after this. But the fact that they even have this many, pretty good. And, well, here's another important thing about this game that I have to give credit. This game has a built-in theater mode, which was not heard of at the time. So the fact that you can actually rewatch what you drove in this, that was just not a thing, especially on console. Like, so yeah, no. Just with those innovations right there, I have to give this the win. Sure, it's weird because this was released in Japan in 97. It wouldn't be released in North America until 98, but we're counting it for 97, and if we're going to count it for 97, it's going to win that. So, yeah. Gran Turismo, pretty cool. Which, well, speaking of cool, not really. Best expansion, which, again, this may be the last time we see this until we do our 2024 category, of course. Because expansion packs, while they were a thing in the 90s, they were still kind of sparse and really only were for PC games. And, well, truth be told, a lot of PC games, they didn't really need expansions, if that makes sense. They just went off the sales that they had, and, well, just kind of, well, that was it. Though there were some games that were a bit more bigger in scope that had the ability for there to be more added to them. And obviously, that's kind of what we're going to be covering here. Granted, these are definitely the bare minimum amount of number of expansions, but I think overall these are probably the best choices. And, well, I'm not going to lie, there's 2 really good choices here, and then there's 2 okay choices. I'd say the okay choices here are definitely Here's a Might Magic, Press of Loyalty, and Civilization 2 Fantastic Worlds. Those are fine. They just kind of add more little small things to the overall experiences for both of those, considering that those are turn-based strategy games. So they're not directly as involved with the overarching thing. Though I do like how with Civilization 2, they add a lot of fantasy stuff to Civilization. So, which gives it a bit more life. Granted, Civilization games would not have that nowadays, which is a bit of a shame, because I think that'd be pretty cool, but they want to at least keep it somewhat tied to a real life growing of a civilization, which I guess that's fine, but you know, it is what it is. And well, with Prince of Loyalty, again, I think it just adds another campaign, but that's about it. It doesn't really add any new units per se. So, but these other 2 expansions, I do think are definitely worthy here. Quake, Scourge of Armagon, which, well, funny enough, we actually recently streamed that. And Command & Conquer, Red Alerts, The Aftermath. So Scourge of Armagon, like I said, we actually recently streamed that, I think this past August. And because we replayed the entirety of Quake and its expansions. And yeah, no, this expansion, pretty fun, if I say so myself. The new enemies and the new laser weapon, I think were pretty fun to mess around with. It is a lot more linear, so you play all the missions in subsequential order rather than you kind of go in between the 4 different like realms that you can go to, like you can tackle in Quake. But I think it works for this, especially since this basically involves the gameplay more towards the science fiction-y parts of Quake, and I think that's actually pretty cool. So, good expansion. And then Red Alert, the Aftermath, basically just, I don't want to say doubles. It adds in a lot of new units, specifically a lot of units for the Soviets in this game. But there's also, well, 2 fully fleshed out campaigns for both the United States and the Soviet Union in this game. And I think that's actually pretty awesome. I could have chosen the first expansion, Counter-Strike, but I think the Aftermath adds in just a bit more value. So that's why I'm going to nominate that here instead. So, but yeah, let's go over the winner. So, the award for the best expansion of 1997 goes to Command and Conquer Red Alert, the Aftermath. So, I really love Quake Scourge of Armagon, but, well, I think this is probably the one, like, this is probably the expansion that deserves it a bit more, especially considering that Command & Conquer Red Alert has some pretty cool stuff to mess around with. But I just think that the fact that this adds in 2 full-fledged campaigns, 9 new units for you to be able to mess around with, I think that already kind of speaks volume, especially since they aren't, those units you can use in skirmish mode and you can use them in multiplayer. So you aren't limited to just playing with them in the campaign, unlike Quake's new weapons and enemies where they're really just only a campaign thing. You can actually mess around with that stuff beyond that. And, well, the fact that this game has small tweaks for multiplayer, basically lowering a lot of the points cost for a lot of the buildings that you can use, it allows for such faster gameplay that I think lends itself well for the new units here. So I think it's pretty cool. So yeah, so that's all I gotta really say about the expansion. Again, not really much else to say though. All right, art direction, because, well, video games can still have a visual style that stands the test of time. And, well, 1997 really, I think, was the year that they, like, a lot of games took advantage of that. And I think it's definitely shows, because we've talked about a lot of games that have really good visuals here. So, and they have really good sound design. So, what did I end up choosing? Well, basically a lot of the games that I've already complimented on just how damn good their art direction is. So let's, I mean, it should be pretty obvious as to why I'm nominating these. For Castlevania Symphony of the Night, I really love its pixel anime art style mix that it has going on. And also, I mean, just that gothic look really resonates with me. Dungeon Keeper, just the twisted dark fantasy look that it's always had, that lends itself pretty well for a management simulation RTS hybrid game that I just really love. Oddworld, because of its more science fiction-y, grim sort of fauna overlook, that it, or not fauna, just kind of more industrial look that I think was very unique for the time and still stands up to this day. Broken Sword 2 and Curse of Monkey Island, because of the fact that they both just look like animated shows coming to life and that you're interacting with it. And, well, Klonoa for its very cutesy, chibi anime anthropomorphic art style that is honestly pretty adorable. So, yeah, 97 had, again, 97 was definitely the year of like style. And that's kind of why I do consider this to be one of the best years in gaming history, is that like games looked very distinct back in the day. And that's not to say that games don't have a distinct style nowadays, but because the graphical fidelity of a lot of games have gotten so much higher in more recent years, and, well, let's be real here, a lot of games nowadays are like try to go for a more realistic look, that can lead to a lot of games looking very similar to each other, which that is a shame. And that's not to say that like I hate every single style that's coming on nowadays. Trust me, there's some games that I think look pretty awesome now, that are very distinct. It's just, if I'm gonna be honest, a lot of the aesthetics that I like are more so a lot of the aesthetics from the 90s and the 2000s. And I think a lot of, and considering that this is still pretty early on in the AAA gaming industry around this time, and how some of these games aren't even AAA games at all, or many of these actually, I think that pretty much makes it to where there's a lot more creative freedom that a lot of these developers had. So, and I don't know, I just kind of miss being able to have distinct styles for a lot of games, but that's just me personally. So let's go over the winner. So the award for the best art direction of 1997 goes to Klonoa, Door to Phantom Isle. This game is so cute! Like, oh my god, it's so adorable. And like but honestly, that is actually kind of why this game is as unique as it is. And yes, I know some people may be like, oh, it's just a baby's game. Not really. I mean, it's a rated E game. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, let me double check. I'm pretty sure it's still like rated E, right? Or at least the first game. Yeah, the first game's rated E, but the second game is rated E10. Interesting. Okay, I did not realize that. But like, it's a unique aesthetic, especially for the PlayStation 1, because yes, it does kind of lend itself very similar to a lot of other mascot platformers at the time, but because this was made by a Japanese studio, and a lot of the ones that were being made were actually made by American studios, I think that actually makes it stand out. And that's weird, because it's kind of weird as well, because, well, I don't know if you can tell on his hat, but yeah, that's a Pac-Man reference, because this game was made by Namco. And I don't know, Namco was kind of in an awkward spot at the time, because they were kind of not doing too well. Because, well, they were more known for their arcade like games, and well, unfortunately, arcades were kind of dwindling in the 90s. And so they started making more console-based games, and Klonoa ended up being one of the experiments that they ended up doing, and I think it actually works out. And again, this is another game where this game was kind of lost to time for a good while, until recently. And I'm glad that Klonoa at least has finally gotten some attention. Granted, I don't agree with all the attention that it's been getting, but I don't know. And again, as I said, I'm surrounding myself with dark, edgy, sad boy, white boy shit all the time. I want something that's like a more adorable. So please just let me be a child again for once, okay? Even though this game's from before my time, but I don't care. Like, just let me embrace the cuteness. So, and even just besides that, this game, I mean, unironically though, this game does actually have some pretty cool 2.5D sprites regardless. So, good platformer. Alright, so that then leads us into the game of the year, which, yeah, suffice to say, this year was a pretty good year. I showed you guys, honestly, some pretty damn good games that came out. And, well, some games that a lot of people swear by being some of the best games of all time. And truth be told, I agree. And that's exactly what we're going to be nominating. Because 97, in hindsight, pretty damn good year as far as I am concerned. It was a fantastic year. And it's helped by the fact that, well, all 6 of these games are highly regarded in some way. Final Fantasy VII, people swear by it being one of the best RPGs of all time, not one of the best games of all time. Castlevania Symphony of the Night being the game that really transcended Castlevania into becoming, you know, the more anime influence Castlevania that we all know and love now. Star Fox 64 for its much improved gameplay compared to the previous game, and for its iconic and memorable level design and characters. Oddworld Abe's Odyssey for being a game that really did try to mature the storytelling in a lot of like platformers, and even just presenting itself in a very, very damn like intricate story and world. And Age of Empires for being one of the most cherished RTS games of all time. And, well, I'm even going to bring in Tomb Raider 2. A game that, even though it's not my favorite Tomb Raider game, I at least recognize that a lot of people do consider it to be the best in the series, and has some pretty cool levels. So again, I really like those Venice levels. Those are pretty fun. I know those aren't the only ones. You go to other locations as well. But yeah, at the end of the day, solid choices, I think. And I don't think anyone's going to really disagree with any of these choices here. So, well, let's be real here. I feel like if the Game Awards existed nowadays, I have a feeling these would be the choices that they would end up choosing anyways. So, or, well, I mean, maybe they choose like an oddball game here and there, but these are, in my opinion, the best games to choose from. So, it's really, really close. But, well, if you guys have seen the pattern, you guys are probably going to know what game I'm going to choose. And, well, it's a game that, honestly, I do love personally. So, here we go. So, we finally reached the final award of the night. So, let's let's get it going. So, the Game of the Year award for 1997, or the award for Game of the Year 1997, or okay, how should I do this? The award for Game of the Year goes to the Game of the Year of 1997 is... Which one should I do? Oh, whatever. Okay. The award for Game of the Year 1997, there we go, goes to... Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I love this game. It is, in my opinion, a fantastic game that really did evolve Castlevania in the best ways possible. And I do consider it to be one of the best games, not just of this time period, but of all time period. Like, goddamn. I mean, the cover alone. I mean, this is a beautiful cover. I mean, come on, look at that. The fact that, like, America got the shitty, blue, like, purple castle picture is a crime. We should have gotten this as the actual cover in North America. Because this is so beautiful. And, well, that, of course, leads us into why exactly I'm giving this Game of the Year. This game... its pixel art is beautiful. It is a fantastic rendition of the castle of Dracula that we've seen in all the previous games. Well, obviously, except for Castlevania 2, but that's a whole other can of worms. And it flows really well. And what makes this game, at least in my opinion, genuinely really amazing is that it was able to blend multiple genres into one. Because yes, we nominated this as an RPG, but well, this game is an action adventure game. It is a platformer, and it's a role-playing game at the same time. It was able to blend 3 different types, very distinct types of gameplay into one package, and it was able to do it flawlessly. Especially for a 2D plane. Like, I mean, it's helped by the fact that this game has some really good... Like, it has a really damn good map for its location. Because, well, it's mostly set in Dracula's castle. And the way in which you navigate around the castle itself, I think it's actually pretty fantastic. And, well... as with many Castlevania games, of course, this game has some pretty damn good music, as always. But also just straight up other audio cues, I think, work well with this. And if I'm going to be honest, as much as people do like the original style of Castlevania, where it was a bit more in line with traditional, like, old school horror, I'm actually one of those people who actually prefers the new look, the new anime look, because this was the game that started that. It wasn't actually technically the first Castlevania game to really hone in with the anime aesthetics, but it was definitely the game that solidified that and made it into the distinct, the distinct aesthetic for this franchise from this point onwards. And I definitely think it was for the better. And, well, last but not least, this was the game that coined the term Metroidvania, because it was a Castlevania game that had the level design of Metroid games, but it also had its unique leveling system that was taken from a lot of action RPGs, not too dissimilar to something like the Secret of, like the Mana games. And so because of this fusion of these different types of games, it created this sort of subgenre of games called Metroidvanias. I don't really consider Metroidvanias to be like a distinct genre of games, but it's definitely a style of game that, well, I love for a reason. And, well, without this, we wouldn't have stuff like Shantae. So, at the end of the day, I think this is one of the best games of all time. And, well, one of the best examples of an early AAA game. Because, yes, I consider this also to be a AAA game. So, yeah, that's my choice. And, well, that then gets us into the recap of all the awards that we've given out tonight. So, of course, for the best game by new studio, we gave it to Blood. Best action adventure, we gave it to Broken Sword 2, The Smoking Mirror. Best platformer game, we gave it to Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey. For the best RPG, we gave it to Final Fantasy VII. Best shooter game, we gave it to Star Fox 64. Best sim strategy, we gave it to Age of Empires. Best sports racing fighting game, we gave it to Gran Turismo. Best expansion, we gave it to Command & Conquer Red Alert: The Aftermath. Best art direction, we gave it to Klonoa Door to Phantomile. And of course, game of the year, we gave to Castlevania Symphony in the Night. As far as my top 10 favorites currently, because, well, there's a lot of really damn good games from 1997, so this is a tentative list right now, but this was a really damn good year. Shoot. These are what I've got right now. So, as of right now, my top 10 favorite games from 1997 include Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Final Fantasy VII, Star Fox 64, Oddworld: Abe's Odyssey, Age of Empires, Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, Quake 2, Dungeon Keeper, Klonoa, and Gran Turismo. So, but of course, we got ourselves the honorable mentions, because I am well aware there's plenty of games that I did not mention. So we're going to mention them here. So we've got Imperium Galactica, which is a grand strategy game. Actually, one of the earliest grand strategy games to ever come out. Which I think was actually pretty cool. But also, you guys are probably wondering, for the shooter category, why did I not nominate Turok, Doom 64, or Shadow Warrior? Well, I mean, I think I mentioned this before, but I don't like the N64 controller. I obviously mentioned that earlier, but specifically for shooter games, I don't particularly think it works out that well. So that's why I didn't really nominate Doom 64. But if I'm going to be honest as well, for Turok and Shadow Warrior, as much as the gameplay in those games are actually pretty good, Shadow Warrior being another Doom clone, Turok being a N64 Quake clone, that honestly have some really good level design. I hate to be that guy, but some of the content in those games have aged pretty poorly. As in, like, there's some pretty bad racial stereotypes in those games. Like, it's not the worst that I've seen, but it's not that great either in either of those games. And it does kind of ruin the experience. I kind of wish that there was, like, I don't know, it's just, there's only so much that you can tolerate when, like, there's only so much you can tolerate from, like, a not very good Native American representation, like, and a not very good Japanese representation. It gets bad, people. I'm sorry. Like, it really does ruin those games for me. So, fret not, because I'm going to give an honorable mention to Theme Hospital, which, well, without that, we wouldn't have 2 Point Hospital, which, even in Theme Hospital, pretty decent. Ace Combat 2 as well. Came out in Japan in 97. I think it came out here in 98. But still pretty decent flight sim for consoles. Final Fantasy Tactics, I want to also give a bit of an honorable nod to, as, you know, It was a RPG strategy hybrid game, but I already had Final Fantasy nominated, so I didn't want to have too many Final Fantasy things in there. I know I had Star Wars games here, but whatever. But also, I know this game is a bit of a meme now because of JonTron, but no joke, Herc's Adventures is actually a pretty decent game. It unfortunately was the result of bad timing because this was released around the same time as Disney's Hercules. And so, well, yeah. But, well, I don't know if you guys know this, but this game was also made by LucasArts. Yes, Herc's Adventures was made by LucasArts. Same people who made Monkey Island and a bunch of Star Wars games. So, which is why this music in it sounds like Star Wars, by the way, John. Anyways, Donkey Kong Land 3, one of the last Game Boy original games that I want to at least give a nod to. So, I mean, very late. Game Boy shouldn't have been a thing in 97, but I digress. And then Riven, which you see there's the sequel to Myst, of a puzzle game that, was pretty cool. Also, that cover actually goes pretty hard, especially for a late 90s cover. I don't know, I just think that cover looks pretty cool. Myth, The Fallen Lords, which of course was made by Bungie. It's there for into the strategy category and also fantasy. So there you go. And then I'm gonna give a guilty pleasure nod to Yoshi's Story. I know it's not quite what people wanted as far as N64 Mario adjacent games are concerned, but I mean, it's Yoshi. Yoshi's cool. I'm willing to give him a pass because it's Yoshi. So, now that being said, there are two games that I know people are going to be pissed that I did not mention that came out in 97, but if you guys know the history of this channel, you guys know exactly why I didn't choose them. Because, well, yes, I know I did not acknowledge Fallout 1 or GoldenEye, but, well, you guys should already know by now, I don't like Fallout. I never did. So, it's just, my friends unfortunately do, and so I'm stuck with people talking about it, but it's not a franchise I like. So, I'm sorry, but I don't want to nominate it. And, well, if you guys have seen my original FPS tier list, you guys know exactly why I don't like GoldenEye 007. I think that game is hella overrated, and even for its time. And I don't think it was particularly that good. I'd rather would play Turok and Doom 64 as far as a general game is concerned. So, which I know that statement may seem blasphemy for a lot of people, but I'm being genuine when I say that. I don't like GoldenEye 007. So, but in any event, that's going to be it for the Caspian Game Awards for 97. I will try to see if I can get the 96 episode done on Saturday, though I will have to probably rush the research, so which might be a bit difficult because, well, Thanksgiving is on Thursday, but I'll try to make sure that I get that done as quickly as I can. But either way, I hope you guys did enjoy this, and I hope you guys we're happy to watch this. And if you guys, of course, want to check out more of these, if you're watching this Twitch, or if you're watching this at Twitch, hit the follow button down below and turn on the bell icon. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe and the bell icon over there as well. While you guys are at it, make sure to check out the links down below, specifically the Discord, SoundCloud, and the Linktree. If you want to directly support me, you can also hit the subscribe button over on Twitch. If you can't necessarily do that, that's completely fine. I'm just glad the guys took time to watch this. But regardless of all that, though, make sure to share the stream to other people as well, and continue to be awesome people in the process. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, and have a good night. Bye.